Giving better light on my face.
Good. All right, we will go ahead and get started. Well, welcome everyone to the first lecture in our plant-based lecture series. I want to welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Colleen Isom, and I'm a nutrition faculty here at Cal Poly's Nutrition and Food Science Department. We're excited to have wonderful speakers today and introduce you to our plant-based minor. This is the Bipin Rekha Shah Plant-Based Food and Nutrition Distinguished Lecture Series. So this is the first lecture in the series, and we plan to move forward with having other lectures on plant-based topics going forward. Just a few logistics. If you are an attendee, we did automatically mute you. So we will be monitoring just to make sure everybody is muted. And then also, if you have any questions for the speakers, please put them into the chat, and you can send them to everyone or to any of the hosts if you want it to be private. But if you post it in the chat, we will be monitoring those questions for the end of the presentation to be asked. So at this point, I want to turn it over to the chair of our Nutrition and Food Science Department at Cal Poly's College of Agriculture, Dr. Harmit Singh.
He's on mute.
I'm sorry about that. One of those things. Okay. Thank you, Colleen, again. I said that already in mute, but thank you again. And thank you, everybody, for joining today. Welcome to this, as Colleen said, this is the first of our lecture in the Bipin Rekha Shah Distinguished Lecture Series on plant-based foods. I'm a food chemist by training, but I'm a vegetarian, so I'm really interested in this topic, as you can, imagine. But I want to thank, first of all, Mr. Bipin and Rekha Shah for their contribution to start this new plant-based minor in our program and to support this lecture series. And in this lecture series, we'll be inviting, as Colleen said again, inviting distinguished speakers to learn more about the plant-based food, because this is not a fad, as our speaker Dr. Sabate will say. It's a real trend going on in the world because of several reasons: sustainability and ethical and some other health reasons. This is all part of that. And I also want to thank my colleagues, Dr. Colleen Isom and Dr. Young, who have helped me to organize this lecture. And we are here, it's a teamwork, it's not my own work. And I also want to thank Dr. Lisa Kessler, our dean, and Melissa, not the least. I mean, she's the background of everything from connecting all the pieces together. And so I really want to thank everybody. I want to invite now Dr. Shah, Mr. Shah, to share his few words for his passion into plant-based food. Mr. Shah is an engineer by background. He has been very successful businessman in this area, but again, his passion into this area has led to where we are right now. Mr. Shah, you're on for a few words.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Singh. And also let me thank ahead of time, Dr. Sabate. I'm looking forward to listening to you, along with my better half, who is just joined.
I'm here. Hi.
So I was asked to say one thing, and that is, why are we supporting this initiative? Okay, and I'll give 3 reasons. First and foremost is, as born Jains, we have been vegetarian all our lives since birth. And so Jainism believes in extreme nonviolence, which is called ahimsa. And by the way, there's an ahimsa-centered Cal Poly, which we've been part of since its inception. And ahimsa means non-injury to other living beings. And so your food practice has to follow that. That means you are a vegetarian. And that is one of the reasons. The second reason for supporting this initiative is health. So I would say since the days of Dr. Dean Ornish, it has been scientifically proven that this kind of food is best for your heart health and your health in general, okay? So the people for the first time learned from his literature and his talks that heart disease can be reversed. And so nothing better than plant-based food to be able to do that. And the third reason is we also have learned, again, proven scientifically, that all the emissions in raising cattle for meat, particularly methane gas, are very detrimental to the environment. So from a sustainability standpoint, eating meat is not good. And yes, it'll take a long time to change the habits of the world, but the sooner the world realizes that it can do without meat, the better. And so to sum it all up, how can you perpetuate this kind of a belief system? And to do that, I thought doing it in the academic environment, making it mainstream, and offering, the minor that we are talking about in terms of at Cal Poly is the best way to do it. And that's what motivated us to do it. And so without taking up much time, let me turn it back to Colleen.
Thank you so much, Mr. and Mrs. Shah. We really appreciate your contributions and your dedication to Cal Poly. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to our first distinguished speaker, Dr. Joan Sabate. And I would like to read a little bit about his many accomplishments. So Dr. Sabate is a professor of nutrition and epidemiology at Loma University School of Public Health. He directs the Center for Nutrition and Healthy Lifestyles. He's originally from Spain, and he's a board certified physician in internal medicine. And so he has had an extensive career really looking at nutrition intervention trials that have looked at some plant-based food compounds. In particular, he participated as the principal investigator of a nutrition and intervention trial that directly linked the consumption of walnuts to significant reductions in serum cholesterol, and published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1993. He is a co-investigator of the Adventist Health Studies, prospective epidemiological studies that relate dietary intake with health outcomes that have the largest cohort for vegetarians. So if you haven't read that research, I highly recommend it. And then for the past 25 years, he's been the principal investigator of many intervention trials investigating the health effects of nuts and other plant-based foods. He's authored more than 200 research articles in the scientific literature, many of them high impact journals. Much of the reason we have invited him here today. He also is a member of the US Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee for 2020. So you all know those were released last year, towards the end of the year. So he was involved with that. And then Dr. Sabate also directs the environmental nutrition research program at Loma University School of Public Health. And that focuses on sustainable diets and explores the interrelationships between the environmental and health impacts of food choices. And ultimately seeks to improve sustainability, health, and equity of food systems. So we're really excited to have Dr. Sabate here. And I'd like to turn it over to him. The rest of us speakers will be muting ourselves and turning our videos off. So it's all on Dr. Sabate here.
Well, good afternoon to everyone. I'm very pleased to be on this conference, and I want to thank the organizers of such a initiative and also the sponsor of that, Mr. and Mrs. Shah. If I knew that he was going to make such an introduction, I would have cut the number of my slides, because when Professor Singh asked me to participate in this, he said, why don't you make an introduction to some of the background and reasons for a plant-based diet, and then talk about your specialty, which is the research on nuts. So that's basically what I'm going to try to cover. And I think the title of my lecture is quite descriptive and very catchy. I cannot take credit for that. I mean, the organizers, came up with this interesting title. So let me go and share the screen at this time, and we can follow the slides. Okay, is this on now?
It looks great. Thank you.
Okay, so the title is plant-based diets. That's the generic thing of the minor that you have here, and also is the things that we do at Loma Linda, and we are very happy when you had this initiation into this, because at Loma Linda we have been on plant-based diets for the last 100 years. But what I like is the subtitle, the nuts and bolts of good health. And as you know, nuts has different meanings. At least I know 3 of them, and we're going to discover, at least 2 of them in my presentation. So I don't know if that moves or not. Do you see the slides moving?
It has not yet. Maybe down in the
No.
left-hand corner.
Okay. So let's start with some definitions. What do we mean by plant-based diets? And what's the difference between plant-based diets versus vegetarian? So we would define plant-based diets as those diets that exclude meat and emphasize unrefined plant foods. And this is in contrast with most of the Western diets that are meat-based diets that emphasize a generous intake not only of meats, but other animal products. These are examples of plant-based diets, vegetarian diets, that there are several, what we call exclusive plant-based or vegan diet, the lacto-vegetarian, so on and so forth. I'm coming from the Mediterranean. I was born and raised in Barcelona, a city by the sea, and I was raised on a Mediterranean diet. And it happens to be that my mother knew quite a lot about nutrition, so it was a healthy Mediterranean diet, similar to what is now proposed. Many Asian diets and other diets of, I would say, traditional diets are plant-based, in which animal products is just an addition in small quantities, but the base of the diets are plant-based. So, 2 facts. Plant-based diets are becoming very popular. If you go to Google and you use plant-based or vegetarian or vegan, you will see that there are hundreds of thousands of hits. So everybody's talking about this. But what is relevant here for us in this presentation is not how popular they are, but I'm saying how relevant they need to be for the dietetics and nutrition professionals. Many of the hundreds of people that attend my presentation are students, and they need to know about plant-based diets, whether they are vegetarians or not, or whether they follow a plant-based diet or not, because it's of increasing relevance for the general public and for the scientific. And the question is why? Why are all of a sudden are so important and so relevant? Well, let me tell you what are the major issues that the world is confronting now as they relate to nutrition. The world population is still growing exponentially. We're above 7 billion, and I think it's expected that in 20 years it's going to be 9 to 10 billion. So diets currently are not adequate, neither they are healthy, because 1 billion people goes to bed hungry. 2 billion people have micronutrient deficiencies or malnutrition, but in contrast, 2 billion people are overweight or obese. In addition, the environments are not sustainable, and the food system seems to be responsible for a big share of that because the natural resources are overgrown and the ecosystems are degraded, and there is biodiversity lost, among many other things. So the president of the International Union of Nutrition Societies said 15 years ago, the most important and urgent issues that confront food and nutrition scientists in the 21st century are beyond the scope of conventionally defined human biology. And you know that nutrition is a biological science. We must be willing to encompass the social, economic, political, and human rights dimensions of nutrition. So even nutritionists know that we have to move beyond biology and encompass the social, economic, political, and all the dimensions of that. I will summarize that besides historical, besides fashionable, besides economical, there are 4 main reasons for advocating plant-based diets at the global level. And those can be summarized in these 4. One is health, the other is efficiency, the other is the environmental impact, and the other one are ethics. Let's review quickly, because we could have a lecture or 2 on each one of them. But I'm just going to cover quickly to go to the nuts and bolts of good health. That is what I'm going to spend most of my time. So the health. Most of you have already know the connection. It has been mentioned in the introduction, the connection between plant-based diets and health. Plant-based diets protect against cardiovascular disease, cardiometabolic risk factors such as obesity, high cholesterol, blood pressure, and all of these cardiometabolic risk factors. But also, we have found that plant-based diets also protects against some cancers. And what is more important or more relevant is on total mortality. So it decreases total mortality or extends the years of life, which is longevity. This slide seems a little bit complicated, but it's not. This is the summary of dozens of papers published from the Adventist Health Study. I've been working for the Adventist Health Study for the last 30 years. And one day, I decided to summarize what was published in the Adventist Health Study 1 and came up with these 2 columns: foods that seems to be protective and foods that are hazardous or detrimental to health. And here we have, as far as colon cancer, legumes seems to protect, but meat and animal fat seems to be detrimental. Fruits, so on and so forth. What we can see here is that of all the protective foods in the Adventist Health Study, that you will know more on this study in just a few minutes, basically come from the plant kingdom. However, the only food that comes from the animal kingdom is mainly meat. So, and it's not as populated this column as this column. So there are many more foods that we can enjoy than ones that we have to, I would say, get far away from them. And there is much more that we could, and all of these foods come from the plant kingdom, and these few come from the animal kingdom. Another reason is efficiency. This is a pure engineering concept. It has nothing to do with ethics or with morality, or it's just efficiency. Here it is. Thanks to the energy of the sun, the plants gets by the photosynthesis, but some of the energy gets dissipated. Then an herbivore eats this plant, and then a carnivore eats this animal. As you move into a food chain, the energy dissipated is more and more, and there is basically a loss of the resources. So whether it's a lion or is a human being that eats an animal, there is a loss about of 10 to 1 as far as energy, protein, and many other things. So this is a pure efficiency issue. So Nature published 10 years ago, the journal in Nature, that shifting measured crops from in the world to 100% human foods will result in increasing 28% in the food supply. So it's going to be all of a sudden almost a 30% more food available for humans, and almost 50% increase in dietary energy. So just by shipping this, so the crops that are here in red and in yellow, mainly raised for animal consumption, this corn and soy and all of these grains would be used for human consumption. That will be a dramatic increase, I mean, in the food available. Vegetarian diets, I mean, that's what we study in the Adventist Health Study, requires less resources. So the diet of a vegetarian compared with the non-vegetarians uses dramatically less water, less energy, less pesticides, and less fertilizer. But you would say, well, but it may be not appropriate. So let's just focus on, for instance, the relative environmental impacts or inefficiency to produce proteins, which is the most environmentally costly nutrient that needs to be produced, coming from different sources. So the same amount of protein, let's say 1 kilogram of protein, if it comes from beans, or it comes from almonds, or it comes from eggs, comes from chicken, it comes from beef. And we use beans as the reference because beans is the most efficient way to produce protein. Soy is the best example, but most of the beans follow the same. So this is as the reference for one. You will see that the amount of land needed, or water, or fuel, or fertilizer, by almonds, eggs, or chicken is approximately 2 to 3 times more. I would say that's a dramatic increase. But if we go to ruminants, particularly beef, is 10 times more on all of this. So from the pure viewpoint of using resources, I mean, it's an inefficient process. Let's go to the environment and the environmental impact. Not all foods are produced equally. So the production of plant foods is more sustainable because not only requires fewer natural resources, but because it's less taxing on the environment compared with the production of animal foods. So not only use less resources, but is produce less environmental degradation. Here we have an example, for instance, of the greenhouse gas emissions. Here we have in brown ruminant meats, whether it's from beef or from sheep, and you will see that it's a dramatic kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of food. However, when we go to other types of meat or animal products, it's much less, but it's very low as far as soy in the far right. So soy or beans is very low, the amount of CO2 that goes to the environment because of the raising of these foods. Here at Loma Linda, with the Adventist Health Study, that we have vegetarians, low meat eaters, and moderate meat eaters. Most Adventists do not eat meat at the same amount or proportions as the general American population. But even as a reference, the moderate meat eaters, that is half the meat intake of the general American population, those that almost hardly ever eat meat and those that never eat meat, the vegetarians, there is a 30% decrease of the overall diet as far as the greenhouse gas emissions. And here we have in brown that meat is the major contributor to this, even with a small intake. And what I think is very relevant, and that captures most of the now younger generations, is the ethic concerns. Shifting to plant-based diets, I mean, is an ethical solution for several reasons, because results in less animal suffering. So this is what we call the animal ethics. Reduces food insecurity by making more food available for human consumption, as I have shown from this paper on Nature. That's what we call the intragenerational ethics. And finally, ensures that the natural resources will be available or preserved for future generations. This is the intergenerational ethics. So these are powerful reasons for drastically shift the general population to plant-based diets. So in summary, what are the main reasons for drastic reductions in meat? Health. Meat-based diets increase the risk for many diseases thus reducing the health and survival of those consuming them. The efficiency argument, conversion of plant foods to animal-based foods is an intrinsically inefficient process. Doesn't matter how much technology we put into this, doesn't matter how much research we're going to do, is intrinsically inefficient. So we may change the ratio of 10:1 to 8:1 or 12:1. I mean, but definitely cannot be never by definition to 1:1. And the environmental reasons, industrial meat production degrades and exploits natural resources, threatens the normal development of future generations, our children, our grandchildren, and the ethical arguments, frees up large amounts of foods for direct consumption by humans and decrease animal suffering. So, in conclusion of this first part of my presentation, agricultural and nutritional policies that lead to the adoption of plant-based diets at the global level will simultaneously optimize the food supply, the health, the environmental and social justice outcomes for the world's population. And here is the but. Implementation of such policies is not free of political challenges. This is not an easy task, but I'm glad that there are people that are supporting that and researchers that were doing research in this direction. So now let's shift a little bit to an issue that it says, we know what vegetarians do not eat, but what do vegetarians eat? And I think, since I guess my audience are many nutrition students, I would like to show data from how vegetarians eat differently, not only with regard to animal products, but with regard to other foods. So do vegetarians eat differently? Here is data from the Adventist Health Study, and we have here as one other reference is what non-vegetarians consume and how other food groups are consumed more or less. As expected, vegans, lacto-ovo or pesco-vegetarians eat dramatically less meat, less dairy products, less eggs, less added fats, less sweets, so on and so forth. However, they eat more than the average meat eater, more fruits, more vegetables, more avocados, more potatoes, more grains, more legumes, and more soy products or meat analogs. And interestingly, they drink more water as opposed to any other drinks. So this is to show that there are differences, not only in the removing the meat from the diet or reducing the number of animal products, but also that there is a more abundance and variety of this. And I'm going to focus on this one, nuts, because that is what I've been asked to present. And I'm going to say that nuts are a common food group in the three background diets that I know. I was born in the Mediterranean and I was raised on a Mediterranean diet. I became vegetarian because my wife was vegetarian all her life. And I also, Loma Linda is an Adventist institution, and also I grew up in an Adventist home. So, I mean, I'm very familiar with the Adventist diet, and I'm going to present data on the Adventist Health Study. And each one of these food patterns has nuts in common. It's interesting when the 4 food groups that were presented here in the United States 40 years ago, I mean, there was no nuts as a separate group, but now the things have changed thanks to our research. So there were some people that were all their life without trying nuts, but I mean, these 3 groups or food diets, I mean, has nuts, I mean, as one essential ingredient in the diet. So what is a nut? What a question. Well, nuts, as I said, has many meanings, the nuts and bolts, but also has another meaning. And here we have. When I learned that what you eat is what you are, I mean, I realized I was nuts. So I'm not talking about being crazy or being a naughty professor, as they call me here, because I'm saying nuts has this meaning also. Real food, I mean, that nature provides in abundance, especially in California, and there is a variety on this. So this is the nuts that I'm going to talk about. It's 30+ years ago that I was a postdoctoral fellow. I had more hair and dark hair, as opposed to now that I have less and white. And I did my postdoctoral fellowship under the mentorship of Dr. Gary Fraser and sponsored by the American Heart Association. My task was to relate in the Adventist Health Study, an epidemiological study of tens of thousands of people, what is the connection between diet and the risk of developing heart disease. And out of the 65 foods in the questionnaire, this was Adventist Health Study 1, a course that started in the 60s and was followed until the 80s. So 3 foods related to heart disease. Those were meat, whole grains, and nuts. Meat increased the risk of a heart attack. Whole grains provided some protection, and nuts provided a lot of protection. We were not surprised by meat. That was the hypothesis. Whole grains, there was some group that has mentioned that, but nobody believed, even ourselves, that nuts had any effect. At that time, more than 30 years ago, the American Heart Association recommended not to the physicians not to prescribe nuts to heart patients because they are very high in fat. Dietitians never prescribed nuts 30 years ago because they were obesogenic. I mean, it produced obesity. And basically, it was a food very rich in many nutrients, but it was just getting out of fashion and not recommended. So nobody believed that nuts, I mean, produce protection for heart disease. Here is the slide. Those that eat nuts hardly ever eat nuts, using as the reference, compared with those that progressive increases in the frequency of nut consumption, 1 to 4 times versus 5 times or more per week. There is a dramatic decrease out of 50% in the risk of cardiovascular disease. And dying of coronary heart disease was the same. So we were the first one not to believe. So what we did is what we say sensitivity analysis, and wanted to see if this relationship was within subgroups of the Adventist Health Study. And here it has the results. We found that in males or females, there was the protection. The ones in pink that ate nuts 5 or more times per week had roughly 50% reduction of the risk. Older versus younger. Vegetarian versus non-vegetarian. So whether people ate meat or not ate meat, eating nuts on a regular basis offered protection for heart disease. If they were no exercise or high exercise. So finally, this idea was accepted, and after 3 rejections, we published in the prestigious journal Archives of Internal Medicine. With this title, A Possible Protective Effect, meaning we were very cautious because we couldn't make very assertive, otherwise would have never been published in the scientific literature. I'm talking about 1992. Afterwards, the frequency of nut consumption has been found to be protective against coronary heart disease in other epidemiological studies. And I was happy when I saw that 6 years later, the Nurses Health Study from Harvard, I mean, did basically the same analysis for non-fatal MI and fatal coronary heart disease. And Frank Hu, the current now chair of the Department of Nutrition at Harvard, published when he was a fellow, this, and found basically the same relationship. At that time, in the following few years, I mean, 4 major large epidemiological studies, I mean, were published. And here we have the summary of the results. All, as the frequency of nut increase, I mean, the decrease of coronary heart disease decrease. You don't have to do a meta-analysis to see that this goes all in the same direction and that there is a dose-response relationship. Nevertheless, we did the computations and we found a clear dose-response gradient on each of the 4 studies, and across the studies, an 8% reduction in the risk was observed for each weekly servings of nuts increase. So if somebody was eating once a week nuts and went to twice a week servings, I mean, reduce the risk by about 8%. What are the things inside the nuts that are so powerful as far as lowering the risk of cardiovascular disease? Well, these are the nutritional attributes. Nuts have between 50 to 75% fat. but they have other things. But this fat is not saturated fat, is unsaturated fat. The ratio of unsaturated fat to saturated fat is almost 10 to 1 or 5 to 1. Just the opposite of what it is the animal fat that has 10 times more saturated fat than monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fat. But nuts are not only droplets of fat, they have other nutritional attributes. The other 50 to 25% by weight has proteins, has dietary fiber, vitamin E, minerals, and phytochemicals. And from different lines of evidence, all of these nutrients has been postulated to be protective for heart disease. So just a dietitian reading the label would have realized that it was possible what we were saying, but there was a disbelief. So what we did is that for the rest of my life, professional life, for the last 25 years, I've been studying the effect of nuts on risk factors of cardiovascular disease to prove that nuts really have an impact on the heart and having mechanisms. So what is the effect of nuts on the serum lipids, on the blood, the lipids in our blood? I designed a study that was published in 1993, and in which we get what at that time was the National Cholesterol Education Panel, or Step 1 diet, a diet designed to lower cholesterol and recommended at that time for people with high cholesterol. And we took this diet, we took away 20% of the energy, and we added walnuts. We fed young males these two diets in a crossover design. Here it is, for 4 weeks, one diet, and the other group, the walnut diet, and then vice versa. And we found that while the subjects were on the nut diet, I mean, the cholesterol went dramatically down, and when they were into the Step 1 diet, went up. And that happens the same in reverse order. So there was a crossing of the results. If you go here in a more simple way, we will say that compared with the beginning of the study, both diets, the yellow Step 1 diet or the walnut diet, designed for lowering cholesterol, lower the cholesterol. But the walnut enriched diet dramatically lower cholesterol much more. These are the results compared with the control diet, a cholesterol lowering diet. 18 milligrams of cholesterol were decreased as far as LDL cholesterol, 22 of total cholesterol. Dramatic decreases for young, healthy volunteers. I was fortunate to publish that in the New England Journal of Medicine, and that changed my life. After this publication, I had for a few months, basically what we call the naughty story of my life. The same day that was published in New England, I mean, Los Angeles Times carried that in the cover, and was I had to pose for the pictures for the journalists at the Metabolic Kitchen in different posts. I mean, it was picked up by all the major newspapers, TVs, so on and so forth. And I had to do many things. One of them, the most fun, was a trip to Japan, in which, as you can see in this picture, I didn't understand the translator, neither what was going on. But I had the privilege, I mean, to be on the stage with Miss California on a walnut magic. Anyway, this is the things. And lately, I mean, I have been awarded the Golden Nut Award. So I'm saying that this is, I would say, the naughty part of my life, or the fun part. But going back to a more serious business, I did many other studies. And by the way, when I say I mean, I directed, but I'm not saying I did myself. We have a wonderful team at Loma Linda and many students, some of them coming from Cal Poly, that finished the master at Cal Poly, came to Loma Linda to do the doctorate. And your major professor here is one of them. Did several studies testing the effects of nuts, different nuts in different dosage. And here we have a dose response almond study. We found that where 10% or 20% of the energy in the Step 1 diet is replaced with almonds, I mean, we have a dose response relationship because total cholesterol goes down, LDL cholesterol goes down, APA goes up, and ApoB goes down. And we have another study that we did, for instance, walnuts versus fish. Both are recommended for as a healthy food. However, we find out that they have quite different effects on blood lipids. Here we have in blue the fish. Eating fish, just 2 servings a week against the control diet, it raises total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, HDL, doesn't change the ratio, but lowers dramatically triglycerides. The same subjects, but replacing fish and putting walnuts into the diet, it lowers total cholesterol, it lowers the bad cholesterol, doesn't change the good cholesterol, and the ratio of the bad to the good lowers, as expected and is best, and the ratio of ApoB to ApoA it does. So the 2 foods have contrasting effects, and that's what it was published in American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Many other studies has been published ever since. For many years, we were world leaders in nut research, but many other labs in many other places have done studies with nuts. So last time I computed, there were more than 80 clinical trials on nuts, and some were from 2 weeks to 2 years as far as length. We just completed one here on 2 years that is soon to get published, the results. All of them go in the same direction. They have beneficial effects as far as the lipid panel. About 10 years ago, we published what is called a pool analysis. It's a kind of a meta-analysis, but we have the original data from all the researchers. And we found that when you put 25 studies together, it showed that total cholesterol went down, LDL cholesterol goes down, no changes in HDL, and favorable changes in the ratios. Interestingly, what happens is that those with higher levels of LDL cholesterol are the ones that experience a greater decrease, not only in absolute terms, but in relative terms as far as percentage. However, as far as the people that are lean, seems to have a greater effect by eating nuts than people that are obese. Confirmed that there is a dose-response relationship or effect between eating nuts and serum lipids. And here we have the summary. Different types of nuts have very similar effects as far as cholesterol lowering. All nuts have greater subjects with higher, so the effects of nuts is greater on subjects with higher LDL at baseline. And we have effects of nuts is more pronounced in lean than in obese. And there is a dose-response effect is manifested. So here is, a monkey giving a lesson to his son. If you don't eat nuts, you won't grow up to have low cholesterol like your dad. These and many other jokes were publishing, I would say, at the same page that some of our results were reported in the media or in the newspapers. So during the last 30 years, the scientific knowledge on the effects of nuts has accumulated and on cardiovascular disease and on serum lipids and has moved in other areas. So I'm going to have a quick review of other areas for which there is less evidence, but still is important as far as the health effects of nuts. But let's review very recent studies that coming from the Nurses-Gelder study that has a very long follow-up in their cohorts, and they repeat the food frequency questionnaire every 4 years. So we are just not going to know what happens of those that ate nuts 20 years ago, but what happens when they change from eating more nuts to less nuts, or from less nuts to more nuts in subsequent years. Here we have the type of nuts, total nuts versus peanuts, tree nuts, and walnuts and peanut butter. And we see that except for peanut butter, it looks like doesn't matter the type of nut or all nuts combined, all have a protective effect for all the 3 cohorts that they manage at Harvard, which is the Nurses-Gelder study 1, 2, and the health professionals study. And this is the pool analysis that it shows that a decrease compared with one that is the reference as far as nuts. What is the nuts and mortality? Trying to compare the effects of tree nuts versus peanuts. And we found that tree nuts seems to have a much more powerful effect as far as lowering the total mortality, the coronary heart disease mortality, or the stroke mortality. Whether this is due to some biological factor or there is some residual confounding because people that eat tree nuts, higher price and or higher socioeconomic status as opposed to peanuts, still is not clear. But it looks like it all go in the same direction of protection. I want to spend just 2 minutes saying about the PREDIMET study. Some of you have heard about, has been in the media, is the largest randomized clinical trial, thousands of subjects that was conducted in Spain to take the primary prevention of cardiovascular disease. Why this study is important and what is the difference between this study and the previous studies? The previous studies I presented are observational, the epidemiological studies. So we never know if indeed is the nut or some factor closely associated. This is an intervention study in which thousands of subjects volunteer accepted to eat nuts or do not eat nuts. And they were followed for 6 years, and then they saw what was the difference in the frequency of developing heart disease. The study that was done was a mixed nuts, and here we have there were nuts that were walnuts, almonds, and hazelnuts. There were 3 arms: a low-fat Mediterranean diet, a Mediterranean diet with nuts or with extra virgin olive oil. Those were subjects middle to age to elderly, and with at high risk for developing a heart attack, but they were free of this disease at the beginning of the study. I was the privilege to serve in the Data Safety and Monitoring Board. Again, this was the picture was taken 10 years ago when I had a different hair. But this is Frank Fu from Harvard, P. Sunier from Columbia, and an epidemiologist from Spain. Here are the results. The cumulative incidence of myocardial infarction, a stroke, or coronary cardiovascular disease. You see in black is the control or Mediterranean diet, low fat. And you have in these 2 colors, in brown and in green, the 2 intervention studies. And you can see that over 5 years, there was a decrease of 30% in the risk of the major events for cardiovascular disease. This is probably the stronger proof that eating nuts really reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease. What do we know about nuts and diabetes? Same study. I mean, they follow diabetes, and you can see that also cumulative incidence of diabetes over the years, it is lower. I mean, on those that eat nuts or extra virgin olive oil versus those that follow a Mediterranean diet, low fat. And what is probably more relevant for you, and especially for you potential patients or clients, I mean, what is the connection between nuts and body weight? You know, nuts are high in total fat, thus they are perceived by the general public as fattening. And we have to accept that obesity is a major public health problem and in our society, and also is a risk factor for coronary heart disease. So eating nuts on a regular basis could be the cause of increasing the percentage of people that are becoming obese. So just 2 things I would like to say before tackling this question. And is, regardless if people was thin or not thin, eating nuts lower the risk of cardiovascular disease. So regardless, I mean, the BMI, nuts seems to be protective. And this was found 30 years ago in the Adventist Health Study, but also in the Nurses Health Study. Here we have the inverse relationship between eating nuts and cardiovascular disease on thinner people and on obese one. or overweight, obese. And you see that offers protection, not the same level of protection, but it offers protection. So somebody that is obese and eats nuts will not increase the risk of heart disease. But the question that we said is not this one. The question says, will increase the risk of becoming obese? So will patients and clients advise to eat nuts to prevent heart disease or to treat hypercholesterolemia, gain weight? So here we have a few slides. On the clinical trials with a small sample size that has been done, 31 of them reported on body weight. These are short-term, I mean, a few weeks or a few months eating nuts versus not eating nuts. And these are the results. On body weight, on a meta-analysis, on body mass index, on waist circumference. And it was found that those subjects, many times the same subjects, while they were on the nut diet compared with the free of nuts diet, if anything, had a tendency to lose weight, to lose the body mass index, to reduce, and also the waist circumference. However, none of the results were significant. So we cannot say that eating nuts is a pill to lose weight. But what these studies clearly show is that eating nuts, even under controlled conditions, does not result in an increase in body weight, in body mass index, or in increasing in the waist circumference. Interesting now is another type of studies, observational studies from Harvard, and in which the diet was assessed every 4 years. And they did a very interesting analysis. They said, what is the change or the risk of changing in body weight when people change the consumption of nuts? So if somebody goes from eating 2 servings per week, but then 4 years later goes to eating 3 servings per week or 4 servings per week, so there is an increase, what happens in their weight 4 weeks later? Sorry, 4 years later. Here we have that for health serving modeling, eating doesn't matter the type of nuts or total nuts, there is a tendency to decrease. So increasing the intake of nuts by half a serving per day, does not result in increase in body weight. If anything, results in the decrease in body weight. What happened with this half serving is substituted for potatoes, potato chips, French fries, refined grains, processed, so all of these things. So in other words, sorry, the other way around. If somebody eating this, I mean, it replaces some with nuts, basically also decrease. So it's not only eating more nuts, but I mean, it's when you replace for some of these foods, I mean, the decrease in body weight is evident. What happened every 4 years as far as the risk of increasing 2 kilograms of body weight? As we know, unfortunately, we're in a sedentary society, and as we're getting older, nurses at Harvard or Adventists in California, we all have a tendency to put on weight with age. That's a secular trend. So the risk of putting at least 2 kilograms of weight or more over 4 years decrease among those that consume nuts. What is the likelihood of becoming obese? Basically, is less likelihood. So this happens for all the nuts. So in conclusion, as far as the body weight, epidemiological data indicates that the inclusion of nuts in the diet poses little risk for weight gain, and this is supported by clinical and mechanistic studies. Thus, it seems appropriate to recommend the inclusion of nuts in a diet that meets energy needs. Not exceeds, but that meets energy needs. Finally, I'm getting close to the...
Dr. Sabate, yeah, we have about 2 or 3 minutes left.
Okay, so nuts and longevity, what happened? So here we have eating nuts in the Adventist Health Study compared with those that hardly ever eat nuts. There is a 2.7 years more of life for males and 1.8 for females. Here we have in the Nurses Health Study, the risk of dying is decreased by eating any type of nuts. And this risk lowering is more accentuated or benefit more about those that eat less meat. Those that eat less meat benefit more by nuts than those that eat meat. So My closing thoughts is that daily intake of a small quantity of nuts is one of the most acceptable lifestyle interventions for the prevention of coronary heart disease and other chronic diseases. And the practical applications is that this can be very easy to fit in almost any regular lifestyle. As I mentioned, I would say nuts are an essential component of any plant-based diet. So it doesn't matter what style of plant-based diet you follow. I mean, I will recommend to include nuts into the diet. And here we have the vegetarian food pyramid that was developed at the Second International Congress on Vegetarian Nutrition that we organize every 5 years at Loma Linda. Nuts occupy a distinct place. This was followed suit by the USDA dietary guidelines, the Mediterranean diet pyramid. So now there are many dietary patterns that put nuts as a distinct food group that has to be included. The cookbook of the American Heart Association, after our research, changed now, and now they do recommend consumption of nuts, as opposed that before that they were not recommending. And even business, they have accommodated. Here we have a restaurant owner that to attract the nutty clients, I mean, even though it's a French restaurant that I'll hardly ever eat nuts, from now on, we are also serve nuts. This was basically a comic that was published in Australia, reporting on our research. So thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sabate. So you provided the foundation for a lot of the future research that continues to be done here, and so appreciate all of your work here. Some of the questions that we have relate to that. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Singh, and he can ask you the questions. Just so everybody knows, we are recording our session. So if you do need to pop off right at 1 o'clock, you can always come back and look at the recording, but we'll be here to answer the questions that we received. Dr. Singh?
Yes, thank you so much, Colleen. Thank you, Dr. Sabate. Wonderful. That was very enlightening presentation. I have the questions list I can go over. The first question is, I'm interested in the potential impact of plant-based diets on triglyceride levels. Fruits and some vegetables are cited as problematic foods for controlling triglycerides. What is the recent science on this?
Well, yes, carbohydrates have a tendency to raise triglycerides, and fats, doesn't matter what source, whether it's saturated or polyunsaturated, lowers triglycerides. A plant-based diet doesn't have to be necessarily excessively high in carbohydrates. It could include, you know, natural fats. I mean, the Mediterranean diet that I presented here, either use olive oil or nuts, and those are sources of high fat. And you can have a plant-based diet that is with adequate amounts of fat and don't have the problem. The issue of plant-based diets that raises the triglycerides is when we go very low in fat. But there's no place is written that plant fats, especially coming from the sources of the plants, I mean, is negative for your health. If anything, we have evidence that is positive.
Thank you so much. The second question, a complaint from a wife, as usual. It is the biggest complaint from meat eaters are the iodine and iron loss from plant-based. Is this true? Also, that is, and that they feel hungry if they do not eat meat. Can you please elaborate? Trying to convince my husband.
Well, there are people that are used to eat meat, as are people that are used not to eat meat. So the sense of hunger depends on the total amount of calories, but also depends of what we are used to or trained to. So if you have a plant-based diet that has not only sugars, but also complex carbohydrates and fats and protein, the issue of hunger, I mean, this decreases. But also there are people that are used to eat meat, and when they remove the meat, I mean, they feel this sense of hunger, not being satisfied. But that is more a psychological than not a biological reason.
Thank you so much. The third question we have is, do you have any suggestions to gain support of plant-based eating in the political arenas?
Could you repeat the question?
Do you have any suggestions to gain support of plant-based eating in the political arenas, in the political system?
Okay. Well, I think each one of us has to do our part. I mean, Mr. Shah I mean, uses his money to promote this thing. I mean, I'm using my time to do research on that. Somebody else could do, I mean, talking to the neighbor. So I'm saying the political arena, it depends. Is one-to-one, is collectively, is in the educational. I think the more people do its own job at the area of influence, I mean, that the things will change. There is not a single method, I mean, to do the things, to change.
Thank you so much. The other question I have is it's about your study, probably. I don't know when this question was posted, but regarding the nuts studies, did this study look at specific type of nuts, or is this applicable to all nuts in general? I don't know which specific part. It's not mentioned in the question. And what percentage of subjects' overall calorie intake came from nuts in this study? So that
I presented many studies. I mean, the studies that we did vary from 10 to 20%. 10% of the calories came from nuts, to the ones that we had the most was 20%. So this is the percentage. Studies that was done, observational studies, typically are between 5 and 10% at the most. I mean, on this, that's the percentage of calories that comes from nuts.
Thank you so much. Another question came up is, according to you, what is the right portion size for nuts on day-to-day basis?
I like this question. I was asked this question by the journalist in 1993 when I presented these things in a press conference. My answer still is the same after 30 years. I think each one of us have a different size. There are people that have, they are tall and big, and typically they have big hands. And there are people that are short and petite, and they have a smaller hand. So a handful of nuts a day, that's my answer. So you don't have to measure, you know, count or be concerned. Just a handful of nuts a day, I mean, that is the right amount.
Thank you. Another question, I think we can go over, this is the last one from the audience, and then I have one more. Whether certain nuts cause other effects like high uric acid, etc.
Could you repeat the question? I don't follow.
Whether certain nuts cause other effects like high uric acid.
Okay. I'm not aware. First of all, I did always study nuts in the context of preventing diseases, not on the treatment of diseases. This is a fertile area of investigations for the future. Okay, so one thing is what happens if I'm eating nuts as far as the likelihood of getting a heart attack. Another thing is when I have a heart attack, eating nuts is good for you. Okay, the answer is yes, but I mean not because we have done research. Okay, so the second thing is to say as far as having uric acid. Is that what they're saying?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, some people have a tendency to have this more than others. For some, this relates to the amount of protein. Nuts do contain protein, but not in excess compared with other sources. So I don't think you have to eat a lot of nuts to really have this issue. A handful of nuts a day, I mean, doesn't have, I would say, the likelihood of getting any of these concerns.
Great, thank you so much. Again, the last question I think will be after this, we can wrap around this thing. What are your thoughts on EPA/DHA needs as nuts only provide ALA?
Okay, that's a very good question. It's basically the long chain omega-3 fatty acids as opposed to the regular chain. Yes, nuts provides, well, nuts, particularly walnuts, are very rich in omega-3 fatty acids. It's only the alpha-linolenic acid. In humans, the conversion of alpha-linolenic acid to EPA is quite acceptable. And we found in our studies that those that while they were on the walnut diet, I mean, their EPA increased, and we have published that. However, the conversion from EPA to DHA is very poor. So DHA did not increase. So this happens not only with nuts, that happens with soy oil, or this happens with flaxseed oil. because these are very good sources of omega-3, but from terrestrial sources. EPA and DHA come from marine sources. You don't have to eat fish if you are vegetarian, I mean, to get EPA and DHA. Nowadays is available algae oils. Fish do not convert these EPA and DHA by eating corn oil. They do eat the algae. So I'm saying we could go and bypass the fish and we can go and eat the algae and we'll have EPA and DHA. This is a plant source of EPA and DHA.
Thank you so much. I think that is end, but I see one question which I think I'll just ask that. Do the nuts should be soaked in water for some time? Because some traditional, like in India also, some nuts are soaked, and then we were told by our grandfather sometime that you soak it, it's a bit different thing. Okay. What is your opinion on that?
Well, I'm asking you a question, Professor. See, yeah. When is going to be the last question? Because for the last 4 questions you have been repeating, this is the last, this is the last.
This is the
anyway,
last.
That's just a joke. Let me tell you, I could do 2 things. The most elegant way is to go back to you because you are a food scientist, because I am not. No, but I'm going to try to answer this question. I'm not going to put you on the spot, okay?
Thank you.
Nuts is a fruit that can have a long shelf life. Has been able to be consumed in many different ways, and many different traditions use nuts in many different ways. Nuts protect for heart disease regardless how you eat them. This is one of the beauties of the observational studies. We didn't put nuts in a given way. I mean, people eat, some eat with fry, others with salt, others with sugar, which is not the most healthy, but I mean, that's the way they eat nuts. Some people eat nuts in bread, in many other ways. So nuts are protective regardless how you eat them. That's first point. Second point, which one is the most healthy way to eat nuts? I mean, of course, as nature created them, no question about this. But the third question is, if I roast the nuts, it's going to lose some of the nutrients. Yes, vitamin E is going to get down, but not dramatically so. So if nuts is the only way that you can eat roasted, it's better to eat roasted nuts than do not eat nuts. By soaking, I think nothing happens, especially unless you let them ferment. If you just soak overnight, I mean, no nutrients leaks away or anything else. The thing is that the texture is completely different. A soaked almond versus a natural almond versus a roasted almond are 3 different foods. The name is the same, but from the culinary viewpoint, and the chefs use for 3 different things. So we're talking about something that from the root is the same, the nutrients is probably almost the same, but culinary speaking and traditionally speaking is completely different.
Thank you so much. The reason I asked is because I have you in hold, so I can ask you the questions. Yeah. But thank you so much for addressing all the questions. I really want to thank at this point, of course, Dr. Sabate, for this wonderful, very knowledgeable, very deep presentation on your studies and the other studies which you have summarized in a very clear way, clearing a lot of doubts. And I thank to Dr. Colleen, Dr. Yang, Melissa for organizing this. Of course, Mr. Shah, Mr. and Mrs. Shah both for giving us this support to conduct this presentation and host this presentation, and all the attendees for joining us today for this presentation. We'll continue our effort to bring you more esteemed speaker like Dr. Sabate, and continue to give you, learn more about the basics to applied aspect of the plant-based food in future. Thank you, everyone. Colleen, did I miss anything? Melissa?
Yes, no, thank you. So just letting everybody know, if you would like to